The air inside the station was thick with tension. The cold walls hummed with quiet energy, and the long corridors stretched endlessly under flickering lights. Everything looked normal on the surface, but something darker moved beneath that surface. Something hidden and cruel. Liam walked with steady steps across the upper decks of the Alliance station, his hands stained with oil, and the smell of burnt circuits following him like a shadow. He was just a systems engineer, someone who fixed machines and kept the lights running, but that day his eyes caught something he could not unseat. Was the noise that pulled his attention. First, not the sound of footsteps or machinery, but a voice. It was sharp with fear, yet held back from screaming, as if the one crying out had already accepted that no help would come. Liam turned it toward the lower platform and saw them, a squad of armed guards walking with rigid discipline, and between them was a figure smaller than them, thinner and walking slower than the rest. She wore shackles on her wrists that sparked faintly with electric charge. Her skin had a pale silver glow, and soft patterns ran across her arms, glowing faintly like fading stars. Her hair flowed like strands of light, and her eyes, when they lifted briefly toward the ceiling, were filled with something deeper than fear. It was silence mixed with sorrow. Liam stood frozen as she passed. There were rumors of alien prisoners being brought through the station and executed without trial, but most people ignored them. They said it was justified that traitors had to be punished and spies must pay the price. But Liam saw her eyes, and in those few seconds, he saw something else. She was not just a criminal or a threat. She looked like someone who had been hunted, broken, and dragged far away from where she belonged. He turned away and tried to walk, but his steps felt heavier than before. He knew he should keep his head down, finish the repairs on the coolant systems, and return to his room like always, but his hands would not move the same way anymore. The memory of her eyes stayed with him like a whisper calling him back. By the time night cycle fell, Liam had made a decision. His fingers worked fast on the console in the maintenance bay, rerouting security lines and disabling a section of the surveillance grid. He knew the patterns of the guards. He had studied the routines long enough to predict where they would be, and when they would change position deep beneath the holding chambers. There was a forgotten corridor, once used for cargo transport, now filled with shadows and dust. He made his way down there, heart pounding with every step. She was kept in cell 9, its door made of reinforced alloy and laced with a shield generator. The control panel beside it flickered as Liam hacked into it, bypassing the code with trembling fingers. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why he was risking everything for someone he had never spoken to. All he knew was that something about her presence felt wrong in a place like this. She did not belong in chains. The door hissed open slowly, and for a moment, she did not move. Her eyes opened and looked at him with calm confusion, not fear, as if she had expected something strange to happen, but didn't quite believe it until now. He stepped inside and reached out to her hand where the cuffs still sparked gently. She hesitated but let him touch them, and he worked silently with a small tool to deactivate the lock. When they fell to the ground with a faint clatter, she flinched, but did not run. He nodded to her, and she followed him without a word. They moved through the dark halls of the station, passing broken panels and leaking pipes where no cameras watched and no voices echoed. The deeper they went, the colder it became, but Liam kept walking, knowing there was no turning back. In one of the old mechanic bays hidden behind a false wall was a small storage room filled with tool scrap and an old thermal blanket. He led her there and motioned for her to rest while he sealed the entrance. She sat down slowly, still watching him with quiet alertness. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke, asking why he helped her. He paused, not knowing how to explain the storm inside him. He said he saw something in her eyes, something that told him she was not guilty, that maybe this whole system was wrong. She didn't answer, but her gaze lowered, and something in her expression shifted, not quite a smile, but not sadness either. They stayed there in silence as the station above them continued its routine, lights flickering, announcements echoing. No one knowing that in the shadows below something had changed. A human had reached out, not in fear, not in hatred, but in silent defiance of a machine built to crush hope. and in that silence between them, in the quiet warmth of that hidden room, two strangers bound by fate began to share something more than survival. They shared a moment of trust. And that was how it began, the story that would one day shake the stars and change the course of two worlds forever. The dim light from the broken ceiling flickered once, then faded, leaving only the soft hum of old power lines above them. Liam sat near the edge of the small room, his back resting against the cold wall, while the alien girl stayed curled near the corner, wrapped in the thermal blanket. The silence between them was not heavy, but uncertain, like the beginning of something that had no clear path. Her silver skin shimmered faintly in the dark, her glowing eyes watching every movement, as if still unsure whether this moment was real or another cruel trick played by fate. Handed her a canister of purified water taken from an emergency supply crate. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his as she reached out. Her touch was warm yet light, like someone who had learned to move without sound or force. After a few sips, she looked at him again and asked why he did it. Not just unlocked the cell, but why he stayed and brought her here and risked everything. Liam leaned his head back and took a breath. He didn't have a single answer, just a collection of feelings that pushed him beyond logic and rules. He told her about the way she looked that moment in the corridor, not just afraid, but full of something deeper, something that spoke louder than words. She listened without interrupting, her gaze steady and unblinking. After a long pause, she finally said her name. Her voice was low and carried a softness that echoed strangely in the empty room. She explained where she came from, a planet hidden near the rim of known space, where her people lived in harmony with nature and machines balanced between mind and spirit. She said she had once worked within the Alliance as a diplomat, trying to build peace and connections, but something had gone wrong, and she discovered a plan, one that would destroy not just her home, but several other non-compliant worlds. Under the name of security and control, Liam listened as her words filled the air, weaving a story of betrayal, secrets, and a decision to stop the weapon, even if it meant being hunted. He didn't question her truth, because her voice held no hesitation, and her eyes no lies. Outside, in the deeper levels of the station, security forces were spreading scanners, drones, moving through maintenance tunnels, and alarms silent but alert. The system was searching, but Liam had already predicted this. He used old tunnels and deactivated routes known only to engineers who had built the station decades ago. They had only a few hours before those paths would be discovered. Motioned to her to get ready, she stood quickly, still graceful even after days. In a cell, they packed what little they had and moved through a narrow shaft above the cargo systems. Liam took the lead, guiding her with soft hand gestures and careful steps. Each moment was quiet, but tense, every sound magnified in the silence. As they reached a forgotten transit hub, they paused to rest. Hidden behind crates and rusted panels, Liam worked on unlocking the control box while she stood watch. Her eyes scanned every corner, her body alert and ready, yet she looked back at him from time to time, as if checking that he was still there, still real. He finally cracked the system, and a side door hissed open, revealing a small emergency tram designed for technicians. Its power cells were old, but functional enough to carry them toward the outer rings of the station, closer to the civilian docks, where he hoped they could find a way off the station. Inside the tram, they sat facing each other, the dim glow of the interior lights casting long shadows. She asked if he trusted her. Liam looked at her for a moment and then nodded, because even though he had known her for only a short time, his instincts had never been clearer. Something about her felt like truth in a place built on lies. She looked down at her hands as if trying to understand his decision to help her. Her fingers traced the faint patterns on her skin, glowing softly with each breath. She said she had never expected a human to care, never expected to see kindness, not after what she had learned about the way the Alliance used people from every species like pieces on a board. Liam told her not all humans followed orders blindly, not everyone believed in control through fear. He shared stories from the war days when he had seen both sides do terrible things, but also moments where simple choices had saved lives, where Acts of courage came from places no one expected. They fell into silence again, but this time it was easier, calmer, as if some invisible wall had cracked between them. The tram moved through tunnels and old tracks, shaking now and then, but still running. Strong when they reached the end of the line, Liam led her through another hidden hatch into the lower docking bays. These sections were old, rarely used, and mostly forgotten, but he knew where to look for what they needed, deep behind a panel cupboard. In dust he found the entry to an emergency shuttle bay, once sealed after a reactor leaked. The shuttle inside was small and battered, its hull scorched from old burns, but still intact. He began working on the controls, checking fuel, and reactivating the core while she stood by helping when asked, their hands brushing now and then during the repairs, not by accident, but without awkwardness. For the first time she smiled, not fully, but just enough to soften her face and light her eyes. He looked at her and smiled back, a quiet moment, shared between two people who had no reason to trust and every reason to run, but chose to stay together anyway. As the engines powered up the station, lights flickered above them and the air filled with a low warning tone. They had been found, but the shuttle was ready. Liam looked at her, and without words she stepped beside him, her hand steady on the console. They launched into the blackness of space, leaving the station behind, not knowing what came next, but knowing they had each other, and for now that was enough. Shuttle moved through the vast silence of space, leaving behind the cold, artificial lights of the Alliance station. The stars outside stretched into long lines as the ship entered a low-grade jump lane, an old hidden route known to few used during the early days of colonization. Liam sat at the pilot controls, eyes locked on the display screen while the hum of the engine filled the small cabin. Arya sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window where blue and white light shifted like waves on an endless ocean. Neither of them spoke much during the first few hours. The quiet between them was not filled with fear anymore, but thought, questions, and the heavy weight of what they had just done. Liam checked the fuel levels and life support, while Arya read through the data logs he had pulled before they left. The files held traces of communication between high-ranking Alliance officers, codes, warnings, schedules, and hidden orders buried deep under layers of encryption. They knew their escape would not go unnoticed. The Alliance had eyes across many systems, patrol ships that roamed even the outer regions, but Liam had a plan, and Arya trusted him more with each passing moment. Their goal was an old moon base, once used as a forward outpost during the war years, long abandoned, but still listed on no official maps. Liam had been there once for repairs and remembered its location, well hidden behind the rings of a gas giant where the shadows were deep and signals were faint. The journey took a full day through light jumps and silent drifting. Their supplies were limited, their sleep broken by alarms and system checks, but they stayed close, working together, fixing small issues, sharing small meals, exchanging quiet stories about their past. Liam spoke of Earth and its oceans and cities that reached into the sky, places full of noise and life, but also moments of deep stillness, like standing at the edge of a forest during winter when everything stopped and listened. Arya spoke of her home planet, where energy flowed through living crystals, where learning was passed through touch and memory, and where night skies glowed with floating gardens of light. Her voice held a soft rhythm when she spoke of it, a sound that reminded Liam of wind moving through leaves, even though he had never heard such a thing in space. They reached the moon base. The landing was rough. The surface was cracked from time and neglect, and the entry doors resisted their commands, but eventually gave in to Liam's overrides inside. The base dust floated in the air, and metal walls groaned with pressure shifts, but the core system still responded to life. Liam powered the lights and atmosphere control, and they set up a small camp in the central operations room, the only space where the temperature remained steady. It was there in the dim yellow light of flickering panels that things began to shift between them. Arya moved with quiet grace, but now her steps were less guarded, her eyes softer when they met his. She no longer kept her distance, and when Liam handed her tools or adjusted her translator unit, their hands touched without Hesitation later that night. If night could be counted on a dead moon without a sun. They sat together near a heating unit, wrapped in old blankets. Their conversation turned from facts to feelings. Arya asked him what made him different, why he did not fear her like others did. Liam thought about it for a long time, then told her the truth. He had seen too much death during the war, too many good lives lost for reasons that made no sense. And when he saw her being dragged like a criminal, something inside him refused to stay silent. Arya reached out and touched his hand, her fingers light and warm. Her people had always believed that emotion was strength, not weakness, and in Liam, she felt something real, something that connected without words or bonds, only through presence and action. She told him she was afraid not of death, but of what she would lose if this feeling between them disappeared without ever becoming clear. Before Liam could respond, the alert system flashed red motion near the outer perimeter. One ship approaching fast, not Alliance registered, but not civilian either. Liam pulled up the scanners and saw it, a bounty hunter craft, fast and armed, meant for short raids and quick captures. They had been tracked, perhaps not by the Alliance directly, but by someone who knew their value and wanted the reward. They had no time to run. The shuttle was hidden, but the base could not hold against a direct hit. Liam made the choice quickly. They would split up temporarily. He handed her a signal beacon and told her if anything happened to him to take the shuttle and keep going. She refused, but he insisted he would delay the bounty hunter, while she stayed hidden and waited for the signal to come back. Outside in the harsh wind of the moon surface, Liam moved through the shadows of the broken towers, his weapon ready, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from something heavier, deeper, not wanting to leave her alone. Not now, not after everything they had shared. Bounty hunter landed with cold precision, stepping out in a full armored suit, scanning the area with a practiced gaze. Liam stepped out from cover, drawing attention away from the shuttle, from the base, from her. He fought hard, dodging blasts and using the terrain to his advantage, but he was outmatched, thrown back against the metal with a painful blow. Arya had stayed hidden, but she felt every sound, every impact, and when she saw Liam fall, something inside her broke. She ran out despite the danger, her hands glowing with the ancient energy of her people, something Liam had never seen before. She reached him, stood in front of him, and raised her hand, sending a wave of force that cracked the hunter's armor and sent him crashing into the dust. She dropped beside Liam, helped him up, her breath short and fast. He looked at her with awe, not fear, not confusion, only wonder. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the fear of losing him. And in that broken moment, between battle and silence, they leaned close, their foreheads touching, as if trying to hold the connection between them with nothing but breath and presence. They had made it through the storm, but the path ahead was still full of danger. Yet in that moment, under the broken sky of a forgotten moon, two hearts, once strangers, now beat with the same rhythm, and for the first time they both knew this was more than survival. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The silence after the fight felt heavier than the battle itself. The wind across the cracked moon surface carried the dust into low spirals that vanished as quickly as they formed. Liam leaned against the broken wall of the outer corridor, his breath slow but steady, while Arya sat beside him, her glowing eyes watching his every move, as if still unsure whether he would stay conscious or fade into another memory. He had almost lost to time inside the old moon base. The lights flickered above them while systems slowly came back online. One of the terminals buzzed softly, then began displaying faded Alliance codes, the kind only few engineers ever got to see. Liam shifted forward, wiping the screen clean with his sleeve, and tapped a few keys. Arya joined him, her fingers dancing beside his over the dusty console. Together they worked like one mind, opening layers of security, peeling away the hidden files that had once been protected by ranks and passwords. They had no right to touch, but they found them. The files were real, more real than they expected, and far worse than Arya had described. They showed blueprints of planetary strikes, marked with silent approval dates, listed for when weapons would be released, across several neutral systems, most of them rich in resources. And low in defense, Arya's home was just one target among many, and her so-called betrayal had only been an attempt to stop a cycle. Before it began, Liam sat still for a long time watching the names of worlds scroll across the screen, names he had never heard but now felt responsible for, because he was part of the same machine that had built this destruction. Not with his hands but with his silence, Arya reached out and held his wrist. Gently, not to comfort him, but to show that he was not alone. They knew then that escape was no longer enough. Running would only delay the damage. It had to be exposed not just to one group or a small corner of the galaxy, but to everyone. The truth had to burn across every signal tower, every broadcast line, every system that had ears to hear and eyes to see. Liam remembered something from his earlier years, a ship, not just any ship, but the Citadel, a mobile command vessel where all central Alliance transmissions were routed before being distributed. It was deep inside Alliance space, but not impossible to reach. If they used the old smuggler routes through the nebula fields and crossed the silent trade zones, it was dangerous more than anything they had faced so far. But Arya did not flinch. Her world had nearly been erased, her people nearly forgotten. She had lost too much already, and Liam had found too much to give up now. They prepared the shuttle, once more running diagnostics, repairing what they could, reinforcing the shields, using parts stripped from the fallen bounty hunter's gear. Their bond had grown beyond spoken words. They worked in rhythm and silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke of shared thoughts, fears and quiet courage. Before leaving the moon base, Arya stood at the edge of the landing deck, looking up into the dark sky where no stars could be seen through the clouded dome. She closed her eyes and whispered something in her native language. Not a prayer, but a promise that she would return, not as a fugitive, but as a voice for her people. The journey through the nebula was rough. The colors outside twisted like living smoke, and navigation became guesswork at times. Liam kept one hand on the manual controls and the other resting near Arya's knee, as if grounding himself in her presence. When turbulence struck, he moved closer, shielding her without thinking, and when systems failed, she leaned over to help stabilize power, both of them refusing to leave the other's side, even for a moment. After days of hiding in shadows, they reached the edge of Citadel territory. The ship was massive, floating between stars like a metal giant, surrounded by layers of defense drones and signal jammers. Liam activated the stealth codes he had once buried in old files back when he believed he would never need them again. Somehow they still worked just long enough to bring the shuttle near the outer docking ring inside the Citadel. The halls echoed with polished boots and perfect order, the kind of place where everything looked clean on the outside. But dark deals lived beneath the surface. Liam and Arya moved through the maintenance shafts, following the internal maps accessed from stolen data. The broadcast core was located near the central node of the ship, surrounded by thick walls and guarded checkpoints. They had only one chance to reach it and send the files before being detected. They found the room hidden behind a large rotating panel guarded only by a system that had never expected someone to approach from the power tunnels below. Arya climbed first, using her light frame to slip through the narrow gap, then reached down to help Liam into the core chamber. The room was quiet, glowing with soft green lights, humming with energy. Liam inserted the data stick Arya had prepared and began uploading the files. The screen flashed once, twice, then turned red. Access denied. They had been detected. Alarms started to echo through the floor panels, not loud, but deep like a heartbeat, ready to burst. Arya turned to face the door while Liam kept working, lines of code dancing across the screen. He looked at her face, calm, even now strong in the face of failure, and something inside him refused to let it end this way. He reached for the emergency override buried inside the system, a piece of ancient code written before the new encryption, and activated it with a whispered command. The files began to transfer. Slowly but surely, every truth, every secret, every plan released to the entire network, their story no longer hidden. Their voices now louder than the silence that had held them for so long. As the final transmission uploaded, Footsteps filled the hallway. Outside, Liam took her hand and pulled her close, their backs to the wall, both breathing hard, not in fear, but in the strange calm that comes when a storm finally passes. No matter what came next, the galaxy now knew, and that truth could not be undone. The transmission had been sent, and the silence that followed felt like the air before a storm. No voices, no alarms, just a heavy quiet that filled the chamber where Liam and Arya stood side by side, his hands still wrapped around hers, the screen before them slowly dimming, as if the truth itself had passed through its final breath. They did not speak because words had little meaning now, not when everything had changed in an instant, not when the secrets of powerful men had been laid bare for every world to see. But the Alliance would not stay silent for long, and the heavy steps echoing in the hallway beyond the chamber were proof of that. They came armed in full body armor, their weapons ready, and their orders clear. Liam stepped forward without fear, knowing what he had done and why he had done it. But Arya touched his shoulder gently and moved beside him, not behind, not hidden, and not silent anymore. When the guards entered, they stopped, unsure of what they were seeing. The two fugitives, not running, not resisting, just standing there calm and unshaken. The commander raised his weapon, but before he could speak, the station lights flickered once, then twice, and a new sound filled the air, one that did not belong to the Alliance. It was a broadcast from the outer colonies, voices rising in protest, ships calling for justice, leaders demanding accountability, and within those voices were the names of Arya's people, no longer forgotten, no longer invisible. The commander received new orders as his communication device buzzed and cracked with rapid updates. Every line of command struggling to hold control in the face of a rising storm that had no center and no boundary. The guards lowered their weapons, and for a moment even the citadel itself seemed to pause, unsure of its place in the world that had just shifted beyond its grip. Liam and Arya were not arrested, not dragged away or silenced. Instead, they were escorted to a side corridor quietly and without words, and allowed to leave, not because the Alliance had forgiven them, but because it no longer knew how to contain what had been released. The shuttle they had used remained untouched in the outer docking ring, and Liam powered it up once more, his hands steady as the engines came to life. They left the citadel without resistance, moving through space as if the stars themselves had opened a path for them, no longer fugitives, but something else, something harder to define and even harder to stop. News spread quickly across the system's planets. Once ignored, now joined voices that had remained silent for too long. Arya's people began to rebuild, not just their homes, but their place among the stars, and they were no longer alone. Allies reached out, bridges formed not from fear or deals, but from understanding. Liam watched it all unfold through quiet reports, shared in passing screens, and whispered signals. And each time Arya stood beside him, her eyes calm, her voice steady. Weeks passed in motion, some aboard larger ships, some spent on quiet moons, where the grass was soft and the wind carried no threat. Liam's injuries healed slowly, but his heart was lighter, now unburdened from the silence he had once carried like armor. Arya remained close, not out of need, but by choice, and each day they shared something new, a memory, a question, a laugh that echoed across places once filled only with shadows. There came a day when they landed on a world that shimmered with light, not from cities or machines, but from nature itself, a place where water flowed in crystal lines and flowers responded to sound. Arya led him by hand through fields that glowed beneath their feet, and for the first time Liam saw the world she had once spoken of. Not in sadness, but in hope. Children ran across the open land, laughter following them like sunlight, and elders gathered in circles speaking stories that carried across the wind. Arya stood among them once more, not as a traitor, not as a prisoner, but as a voice of change, a bridge between what was and what could still be. Liam watched her from a distance and knew deep inside that he had never truly understood what courage meant until he had seen her fight, not with weapons but with truth later. As the sky turned soft with the colors of dusk, Arya walked back to him, her steps quiet but sure. She sat beside him near the edge of a small lake, where the surface reflected the stars above and the silence between them felt full, not empty. She asked him if he missed Earth, and he thought about it for a long moment, then said he didn't miss the place as much as he missed the person he had once hoped to be, and now standing beside her in a world reborn. He felt like that person had finally returned. She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the sky where two moons rose side by side, their light blending in a way that made everything below shimmer with silver and gold. The future was still uncertain, and there would always be battles ahead, but for now they had peace, not just in the world around them, but in the bond they had forged through fire and silence, through fear and trusting. A galaxy once ruled by secrets and power, the story of one human and one alien girl had become something more than survival. It had become a reminder that sometimes the smallest choices make the greatest changes, and sometimes love finds its way even in the darkest corners of space. Their journey had begun with fear and ended in light, and though they had never expected it, they had found in each other not just escape or refuge, but a reason to keep going, a reason to believe, and a reason to stay the end.